Captain Jake Morrison was having what he thought would be a normal day, patrolling the quiet edge of known space. The Iron Guardian hummed softly around him as his crew went about their routine checks. Space out here was peaceful, almost boring. That changed in an instant when the emergency signal hit their communications array. "Captain, you really need to see this right now," Lisa Park called from her station. Her voice had that tight edge that meant trouble was coming their way. Jake could see her hands shaking slightly as she worked to clean up the garbled transmission they'd just received. The message was unlike anything they'd encountered before. It wasn't the usual pirate distress call or merchant ship breakdown. This was something much worse. The signal came from the Zealothi colonies, a cluster of worlds that most humans had only heard about in academy lectures. These weren't your typical alien neighbors. The Zealothi were living crystals, not creatures that looked like crystals, but actual crystalline beings that had somehow evolved consciousness. Jake had seen the briefing videos during first contact training. They were beautiful in an otherworldly way, their bodies catching and reflecting light in patterns that served as their language. But they were also the most fragile, intelligent species anyone had ever discovered. These beings were so delicate that loud noises could literally crack them apart. Radio transmissions had to be carefully filtered, or the electromagnetic waves would cause them physical agony. Even bright lights could damage their structure if not properly modulated. The fact that they were sending out a distress call at all meant they were truly desperate. "What exactly are they saying?" Jake asked, moving closer to Lisa's workstation. The young officer had gotten better at decoding alien languages since joining his crew, but Zealothi communication was notoriously difficult. "It's bad, sir. Really bad. Something called the Kronok Empire has invaded their space. They're systematically destroying the crystal cities one by one." Lisa paused, her face growing even paler. "Captain, the Kronok aren't just conquering these worlds, they're basically committing genocide. I think the Zealothi are too weak to deserve to exist." Jake felt his jaw tighten. He'd heard of the Kronok before, Slekum-based warriors from the galaxy's harsh inner systems. They respected only strength and viewed anything they considered weak as an evolutionary mistake that needed to be corrected. In their minds, wiping out the Zealothi wasn't murder. It was helping the universe along. "Have the Galactic Council responded to this?" he asked, though he already suspected he knew the answer. "That's the problem, sir. They received the same distress call over a week ago. They've been debating ever since, but nobody can figure out how to help. Any military force strong enough to fight the Kronok would accidentally kill the very people they're trying to save just by showing up." Jake understood the dilemma immediately. The Zealothi were so fragile that the vibrations from starship engines could shatter them. The sound of soldiers marching would be like an earthquake to them. Even the electromagnetic fields generated by standard military equipment could cause them excruciating pain or death. The galaxy's greatest civilizations were paralyzed by their own power. They were simply too strong, too loud, too overwhelming for the crystal beings to survive their presence. It was like trying to perform surgery with a sledgehammer. But as Jake stared at the ongoing distress signal, an idea began forming in his mind. Humans were newcomers to the galactic community. Most alien species still viewed them with a mixture of fear and disgust. Earth was what the galaxy classified as a death world, a planet so hostile that anything evolving there became incredibly dangerous. Humans were officially listed as Class 12 Deathworlders, putting them in the same category as some of the galaxy's most feared predators. Most civilized species crossed the street when they saw humans coming. The idea of sending them to rescue the galaxy's most vulnerable beings would be seen as insanity. But Jake was thinking about something the galactic community didn't understand about humans. Yes, they were incredibly dangerous when they needed to be, but they were also capable of incredible gentleness when the situation called for it. Without consulting headquarters or waiting for official approval, Jake activated the emergency response beacon. His message would reach Earth Command within hours, but more importantly, it would also be picked up by any human vessels in the area. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Iron Guardian," he broadcast on all human frequencies. "We're volunteering for immediate rescue operations in Zealothi space. Any human ships able to assist, please respond immediately." Lisa stared at him with wide eyes. "Captain, The brass is going to lose their minds when they hear about this. Jake smiled grimly. Let them. Sometimes you have to do what's right, not what's safe. The news of Captain Morrison's volunteer mission hit the Galactic Council chambers like a bomb going off. Within minutes of receiving the transmission, the massive debate hall was filled with panicked voices from dozens of different species, all talking at once in a cacophony that would have been deafening to human ears. Ambassador Toth, towering figure from the Centauri Federation with 4 arms and skin like polished metal, slammed all of his appendages down on the speaker's podium, so hard that the sound echoed through the chamber. The violent gesture immediately silenced the crowd. Have you all lost your minds? He roared, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen 3 centuries of galactic politics. Humans are classified as Class 12 Deathworlders.
How dare...
You understand what that means? Their heartbeats alone could kill a Zealothi from 50 meters away. The ambassador's words sent a new wave of worried murmurs through the assembly. Everyone knew the classification system. Class 12 was reserved for species so dangerous that most civilized worlds required special permits just to allow them to land. Humans fell into the same category as the acid-spitting Vorthok hunters and the radiation-immune stellar wasps. There. Ship engines produce electromagnetic pulses that would be like torture devices to the crystal beings. Continued another council member, a jellyfish-like creature whose translucent body pulsed with nervous bioluminescence. Matt's assuming. They could even get close enough to help without accidentally stepping on someone. But while the council argued in their comfortable chambers, something very different was happening aboard the human vessel speeding toward Zealothi space. Chief Engineer Mike Davis had been working non-stop since Morrison's announcement, and his small engineering bay had been transformed into something resembling mad scientist laboratory. Davis was the kind of engineer who saw problems as puzzles to be solved rather than obstacles to be avoided. He'd grown up fixing broken machinery on Luna Colony, where a single mistake could kill everyone in the habitat. The challenge of making humans safe for the Zealothi is exactly the kind of impossible problem that got his creative juices flowing. All right, let's break this down piece by piece, he muttered to himself. Surrounded by holographic displays showing Zealothi physiology data, they're sensitive to vibrations, electromagnetic fields, and sound waves, but they're not made of glass. They're crystalline structures with specific resonant frequencies. Working alongside Dr. Rebecca Chen, ship's science officer who specialized in xenobiology, Davis began developing what they called the Gentle Touch Protocol. It was unlike anything that had ever been attempted in galactic history. The first breakthrough came when Chen discovered that human biorhythms, when properly filtered and modulated, actually had a stabilizing effect on Zealothi crystal matrices. It was like finding out that a jackhammer could be turned into a tuning fork with the right modifications. Mike, look at this, Chen called out excitedly, pointing to her latest test results. If we can create biodampening fields around our people, we can actually cancel out the harmful frequencies while amplifying the helpful ones. Davis grinned as he looked at the data. So instead of being walking disasters, we could actually make the Zealothi feel better just by being nearby. That's beautiful, Rebecca. Absolutely beautiful. The engineering team worked around the clock, developing specialized contact suits that would wrap humans in layers of protective technology. The suits would generate whisper-quiet atmospheric processors, ensuring that even human breathing wouldn't create dangerous air currents. Biodampening fields would neutralize the electromagnetic signatures that human technology naturally produced. Meanwhile, the Kronak Empire was making the most of the Council's paralysis. Admiral Krex, a massive silicon-based warrior whose body looked like it had been carved from volcanic rock, was systematically wiping out Zealothi colonies. While the galaxy's supposed protectors sat in their chambers and argued, Krex had been fighting wars for over 2 centuries, and he had nothing but contempt for what he saw as the galaxy's weakness. The Zealothi represented everything he hated about modern civilization. They were fragile, peaceful, and completely unable to defend themselves. In his mind, destroying them wasn't cruelty, it was natural selection in action. When news reached him that humans were coming to attempt a rescue, Krex actually laughed. The sound was like grinding stone, a noise that would have been lethal to any zealothy within hearing range. Deathworlders, coming to save crystal dolls, he transmitted mockingly, across galactic communication channels, making sure his contempt was heard by every civilization monitoring the crisis. This should be entertaining. We'll crush your precious humans along with these pathetic creatures. At least the Deathworlders will provide some sport before they die. The message reached Morrison's ship just as the engineering team was putting finishing touches on their protective protocols. The captain listened to Krex's taunts with a calm expression that his crew learned to recognize as extremely dangerous. Morrison activated the ship's communication array and sent a response that was heard across half the galaxy. His voice was steady, confident, and carried the unmistakable tone of someone who had already made up his mind about how this was going to end. Admiral Krex, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the human vessel Iron Guardian. We've received your message and appreciate the warning. We're currently 3 hours out from Zealothy space with a full rescue fleet. Thank you for letting us know exactly where to find you. He paused for just a moment before adding, we're on our way. When the human transport ships descended toward New Harmony, capital city of the largest Zealothy colony, nobody knew what to expect. The city itself was unlike anything humans had ever seen before. Towering spires of living crystal reached toward the sky, their surfaces constantly shifting through subtle color changes that served as the Zealothy equivalent of conversation. Sergeant Tom Bradley had been a Marine for 12 years, but nothing in his training had prepared him for this. As the transport doors opened with barely a whisper, thanks to Davis's sound-dampening modifications, he got his first real look at the beings they'd come to save. The Zealothy were breathtaking. Each one was unique, their crystalline bodies reflecting light in patterns that seemed almost alive. Some were tall and slender like living pillars of gemstone, while others were more compact with faceted surfaces that sparkled like diamonds. They moved with a fluid grace that reminded Bradley of dancers, their every gesture creating ripples of colored light across their skin. But what struck him most was how terrified they were. These beautiful beings were huddled together in groups, their normally bright surfaces dim with fear. Many showed visible cracks and fractures from the ongoing Kronak attacks. Some of the smaller Zealothy, who Bradley assumed were children, had pieces of their crystal bodies held together with what looked like organic binding agents. All right, people, Bradley whispered into his suit's communication system, his voice automatically modulated to frequencies that wouldn't harm the Zealothy. Remember your training. We move like we're walking through a cathedral made of soap bubbles. Every step counts. The Marines spread out in perfect formation, their movements so careful and deliberate that they looked like they were performing some kind of slow-motion dance. The specialized suits Davis had designed were working perfectly, where normal human footsteps would have created vibrations that could shatter Zealothy bones. These Marines moved in complete silence. Dr. Amy Foster, the team's xenolinguist, had spent the entire journey studying Zealothy communication patterns. She'd discovered that they didn't just speak with light, they felt with it too. Every color change, every shift in brightness carried meaning. It was like learning to speak in emotions made visible. Blue spirals mean fear, she'd explained during the briefing. Green pulses are gratitude. If you see red flashes, that's pain. And whatever you do, don't create any sudden bright lights. To them, that's like someone screaming directly in their face. Now, as Foster approached the first group of Zealothy refugees, she activated her suit's communication array. Gentle patterns of light began flowing across her helmet's surface, forming the careful symbols she'd learned meant friend and help and safe. The response was immediate and heartbreaking. The Zealothy began pulsing with soft green light, their gratitude so intense it was visible even to human eyes. Several of them reached out with delicate crystal appendages, touching Foster's suit with movements so gentle they barely registered on her sensors. Private Kevin Martinez made the discovery that would change everything. He was helping evacuate a section of the city where several Zealothy had been injured in a recent Kronak bombing. These beings were in bad shape, their crystal structures fractured and unstable, their light patterns flickering weakly as Martinez knelt beside one of the SCH wounded Zealothy. something unexpected happened. The being's cracks began to seal themselves, the fractures slowly knitting back together, like living glass repairing itself. Martinez stared in amazement as the Zealothy's light patterns grew brighter and more stable. "Doc Foster, you need to see this," he called softly. "I think my suit is actually helping them heal." Foster rushed over and immediately began scanning both Martinez and the wounded Zealothy. What she found was extraordinary. The biodampening field around Martinez's suit wasn't just canceling out harmful human frequencies, it was generating a resonance pattern that perfectly matched the Zealothy's natural healing vibrations. "This is incredible," she whispered. "Your suit is basically singing to them in their own frequency. It's like you've become a walking healing device." Word spread quickly through the rescue teams. Within an hour, they'd discovered that humans in the specialized suits didn't just avoid harming the Zealothy, they actually made them stronger and healthier. Marines found themselves surrounded by grateful crystal beings who seemed to glow brighter just from being near them. The evacuation proceeded faster than anyone had dared to hope. Humans who had been trained as soldiers found themselves gently cradling beings that looked like living jewels, carrying them to safety with the kind of careful precision normally reserved for handling priceless artifacts. Bradley watched his tough Marines transform before his eyes. These were soldiers who could punch through steel doors and survive in environments that would kill most other species. But here they were, moving with the delicacy of master craftsmen, their massive hands gentle enough to hold soap bubbles without popping them. The sight was being broadcast across the galaxy, and civilizations everywhere watched in stunned amazement. The humans that everyone feared as unstoppable killing machines were revealing themselves to be capable of incredible tenderness. Children of Deathworlds were proving they could be gentler than angels when the situation called for it. Within 6 hours of landing, the human teams had evacuated over 10,000 Zealothy without a single injury. It was a rescue operation that the galaxy's finest civilizations had declared impossible, carried out by the species everyone considered too dangerous to trust, but their celebration was cut short when the warning signals began flashing. Long-range sensors had detected the approaching Kronok war fleet, and Admiral Krex was bringing enough firepower to glass an entire planet. The Kronok had been watching the human rescue efforts with growing contempt. In their minds, the gentle behavior they were witnessing proved that humans were just another weak species pretending to be tough. They couldn't understand that humans were being gentle by choice, not because they had to be, as the massive Kronok battleships dropped out of hyperspace. Their commander was confident this would be an easy victory. They were about to learn the difference between someone who couldn't fight and someone who simply preferred not to. The gentle giants were about to show the galaxy what happened when someone threatened the innocent beings they'd sworn to protect. The attack happened so fast that even the humans' enhanced sensors barely caught it coming. Admiral Krex had used the oldest trick in the military handbook, sending a small group of ships to distract the human fleet, while his main force positioned themselves behind the evacuation convoy. It was a strategy that had worked countless times against other species, but he was about to learn that humans were different in ways he couldn't imagine. The first Kronok plasma bolts tore through the convoy's outer defenses, like they were made of paper. Captain Morrison had positioned his ships to protect the Zealothy transport vessels, but the sheer overwhelming force of the surprise attack punched through their defensive formations. What happened next would haunt every human witness for the rest of their lives. The transport ship Gentle Hope took a direct hit to its cargo bay. Inside that bay were nearly 300 Zealothy refugees, beings that the human crew had spent the last week learning to protect and care for. The plasma blast didn't just destroy the ship's hull. It sent shock waves through the entire vessel that no amount of dampening could absorb. Staff Sergeant Beth Williams was in that cargo bay when it happened. She'd been helping evacuate the last group of Zealothy children when the attack began. The blast threw her across the bay, her specialized suit systems screaming warnings as the ship's atmosphere began venting into space. But the sound that would stay with her forever wasn't the alarm klaxons or the roar of escaping air. It was the sound of crystal beings dying. The Zealothy didn't scream when they were hurt. Instead, Their bodies created a sound like wind chimes breaking, a delicate musical note that faded into silence as their life force left them. Williams found herself holding a small zealothy child, no bigger than a human toddler, as hairline cracks spread across its crystal surface. The little being's light patterns flickered weakly, trying to form the symbols that meant thank you even as it died in her arms. All around the cargo bay, other Marines were experiencing the same horror. These tough soldiers who had faced combat across a dozen worlds found themselves cradling dying crystal beings, watching helplessly as creatures they'd sworn to protect shattered beyond repair. The zealothy weren't just casualties to them anymore. Over the past week, they'd become something much more precious. Private Danny Rodriguez had learned to recognize the light patterns of an elderly zealothy named Harmony of Sevensons. The old being had taught him how to modulate his suit's frequencies to create colors that meant friendship and hope. Now Rodriguez watched as Harmony of Seven Suns cracked apart, its ancient wisdom dying with a sound like breaking glass. Corporal. Lisa Chen had spent hours learning to communicate with zealothy children, developing simple games that could be played through light patterns and gentle touches. She'd watch them play and laugh, their crystal bodies sparkling with joy. Now she knelt among the fragments of beings who would never play again. The rescue operation that had filled every human with pride turned into a nightmare in minutes. Despite all their careful preparation, all their gentle techniques, they were watching the very beings they'd come to save die in their arms. And there was absolutely nothing they could do to stop it. But something was happening to the humans as they witnessed this slaughter. Years of evolutionary programming that had made them the dominant species on a death world began to kick in. The same instincts that had helped them survive against saber-toothed tigers and ice ages were now focusing on a single target, the beings responsible for killing the innocents they'd sworn to protect. Commander Paul Bradley, Morrison's tactical officer, was monitoring the battle from the bridge when he felt the change. His training told him to focus on defensive maneuvers to protect what remained of the convoy. But something deeper than training was taking over. Something that had been bred into humanity over millions of years of surviving on the galaxy's most dangerous planet. All ships, new orders, Bradley transmitted, his voice carrying a coldness that made even veteran Marines pay attention. Forget defensive formations. We're going hunting. The human fleet began to transform before the Chronoc's eyes. Ships that had been moving predictably in protective patterns suddenly scattered in seemingly random directions, but there was nothing random about it. Each human captain was now thinking like a predator, using skills their species had perfected over countless generations of being the thing that other things were afraid of. Captain Jennifer Murphy, commanding the destroyer Righteous Anger, was the first to strike back. She'd been watching the Chronoc attack patterns for the past 10 minutes. And her human brain had already identified weaknesses that the aliens didn't even know they had. The Chronoc moved in rigid formations, following attack protocols that had worked against civilized species for centuries, but humans weren't civilized, and their protective instincts were triggered. They were apex predators with starships. Murphy's destroyer came at the Chronoc flagship from an angle that should have been impossible, using the gravity well of a nearby moon to slingshot into an attack vector that caught the aliens completely off guard. Her plasma cannons, designed for ship-to-ship combat, began systematically taking apart Krex's command vessel piece by piece. The Chronoc had expected the humans to break under pressure. They'd assumed that a species capable of such gentleness must be weak at heart. They couldn't understand that humans had evolved to be protective of those they cared about, and that this protection instinct came with a price for anyone who threatened. Their charges all across the battlefield, human ships began displaying tactical brilliance that terrified even their own crews. They moved like a pack of wolves, coordinating attacks without formal communication, each captain instinctively understanding what the others were planning. The Chronoc found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to know their moves before they made them. Admiral Krex, watching his supposedly easy victory turn into a massacre, finally began to understand what he was truly facing. These weren't just angry soldiers seeking revenge. These were Deathworld predators who had been pushed past their breaking point. and they were bringing millions of years of evolutionary warfare experience to bear on his forces. The humans weren't fighting for conquest or territory or resources. They were fighting for something much more dangerous: the memory of crystal children who had died calling them friends, and that made them the most terrifying enemy the Kronok Empire had ever encountered. The battle lasted exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes. When it was over, the mighty Kronok Empire that had terrorized the galaxy for 3 centuries was nothing more than scattered debris floating in the void around New Harmony. Admiral Krex, the feared warrior who had boasted about crushing humans and crystal beings alike, spent his final moments sending a desperate transmission that would be remembered throughout galactic history. "Please," his voice crackled through the static. It's barely recognizable as the confident commander who had mocked humanity just hours earlier. "We surrender. We yield. Call off your ships. We didn't know, we didn't understand what you really were." Captain Morrison, standing on the bridge of the Iron Guardian as Krex's flagship broke apart under concentrated human fire, felt no satisfaction in the victory. They'd won, but the cost had been written in: the deaths of innocent crystal beings who had trusted them to keep them safe. "All ships cease fire," Morrison ordered, his voice carrying across the fleet. "Let the survivors go. They've learned their lesson." But the real story wasn't the destruction of the Kronok fleet. The galaxy had seen civilizations rise and fall before. What happened next would change the fundamental nature of interstellar politics forever. 3 months after the battle, Colonel Ryan Foster stood in what had once been the Zealothi capital city, watching human construction crews work alongside crystal engineers to rebuild New Harmony. The sight would have been impossible to imagine before the war. Massive human workers in their protective suits moved with the same ballet-like precision they'd learned during the evacuation, placing delicate crystal structures with the care of artists creating masterpieces. The humans weren't just helping to rebuild. They were staying permanently. Foster had been tasked with establishing the first human Zealothi joint colony, a concept so revolutionary that half the Galactic Council had voted against even discussing it. The idea of Deathworlders living peacefully alongside the galaxy's most fragile species seemed like madness, but the Zealothi themselves had requested it. "We feel safer when the humans are near," their spokesperson had explained through carefully modulated light patterns. "They make our crystals sing with health, and we know that no one will dare to hurt us while they are here." The colony that grew up around New Harmony became something unique in galactic history. Human children learned to walk quietly before they could run loudly. Their parents sang lullabies at frequencies that wouldn't disturb sleeping Zealothi neighbors. It was a place where the galaxy's most dangerous species had voluntarily made themselves gentle. Dr. Rebecca Chen, now serving as the colony's chief medical officer, watched her 3-year-old daughter play with a group of young Zealothi in the community center. The little girl had learned to whisper before she could shout, to move carefully before she could run wildly. She was growing up in a world where consideration for others wasn't just politeness. It was literally a matter of life and death. "Mommy, look," the child called out in the softest voice imaginable, her words automatically modulated by the small device all human children wore. "Crystal Song taught me how to make rainbow patterns." Chen watched as her daughter created gentle light displays with a handheld device, communicating with her crystalline playmates in their own language. The sight never failed to amaze her. These were children who represented the future of 2 completely different species learning to live together. The success of New Harmony sparked something unexpected across the galaxy. Within a year, 12 other vulnerable species had formally requested human protection. The Gossamer folk, beings made of living light who could be disrupted by strong electromagnetic fields. Singing moss colonies, plant-based intelligences that were constantly threatened by more aggressive species. The Cloud Dancers, gaseous beings who lived in planetary atmospheres and were helpless against industrial pollution. Each request presented unique challenges, and each time, human ingenuity found solutions. Engineers developed new technologies to interact safely with each species. Scientists learned new forms of communication. Soldiers retrained themselves to be protectors instead of warriors. Ambassador Toth, the same Centauri Federation representative who had opposed human involvement, from the beginning, found himself addressing the Galactic Council with a very different message than anyone expected. "I was wrong," he admitted to the assembled representatives. "Y'all were. We looked at the humans and saw only their capacity for violence. We missed the most important thing about them. They choose when to use that violence, and they choose to use it only to protect others." Formal recognition came in the form of the Whisper Accords, signed in the rebuilt Crystal Cathedral at the heart of New Harmony. The document was unlike any treaty in galactic history. It wasn't about trade, agreements, or territorial boundaries. It was about humanity accepting the role of guardian for species that couldn't protect themselves. Captain Morrison, now promoted to admiral, kept his final log entries short and simple, the way military reports were supposed to be. But those few words captured something that would echo through history. Mission accomplished. The strong exist to protect the weak. This is the human way. Years later, children across the galaxy would grow up hearing stories about the Deathworlders who became gentle giants. They'd learn about humans who could kill with their bare hands, but chose instead to hold crystal babies with infinite care. About warriors who turned their capacity for violence into an unbreakable shield around those who needed protection. The galaxy had learned that its true strength wasn't about the ability to destroy. It was about knowing when to be gentle and when to be fierce, and having the wisdom to choose correctly. Humanity had shown them that the most dangerous beings in the universe could also be the most protective, and that sometimes the best guardians were the ones everyone else was afraid of. In the end, the Deathworlders had become exactly what the galaxy needed them to be. Not conquerors, but protectors. Not destroyers, but defenders. Not monsters, but guardians who would face any threat. To keep the innocent safe.